There is something about a small ring on a queen's finger that can hold the weight of an entire family's history. Most people never notice it. The cameras sweep past it. The commentators talk about the gowns, the tiaras, the smiles. But sometimes the smallest detail carries the biggest secret. And when that secret finally surfaces, when someone quietly puts together what that tiny gold band actually means, the reaction it produces is not what anyone expects. King Charles did not shout. He did not make a grand statement. What happened instead was far more powerful than any of that. It was quiet. It was private. And according to those who witnessed it, it left the people in that room completely speechless. This is the story of a hidden ring, a woman who never explained it, a princess who noticed what everyone else missed, and a king who, when the truth was placed in front of him, could not hold back the tears. To understand why King Charles reacted the way he did, you have to go back a long way. You have to go back to a little boy who grew up in one of the most unusual households in the world, a household where duty came before everything, where emotions were considered a private matter, and where love was shown not through words but through presence. King Charles was born into a family that the world admired but rarely understood. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was sovereign above all else. His father, Prince Philip, was a man of steel, disciplined, sharp, sometimes blunt, and deeply complicated. The relationship between Charles and Philip was never simple. Royal biographers have described it as one of the most complex father-son bonds in modern history. Philip was a man who had survived exile, reinvention, and decades of walking one step behind his wife. He had given up his naval career, his surname, his independence, all of it, to serve a role that the rulebook had not fully written yet. He did it without complaint. He did it with a kind of stubborn military precision that left little room for softness. And Charles, who was by all accounts a sensitive, artistic, emotional child, often felt the gap between what he needed from his father and what his father was able to give. Royal expert Ingrid Seward, in her book about the royal family, wrote that as a child, the shy and sensitive young Charles was frequently reduced to tears when his father reprimanded him. The Queen, who was not inclined toward confrontation, would often go along with Philip's decisions, leaving Charles to navigate those moments alone. It was not a household built for emotional expression. What Philip felt for his son was real. Those close to him insisted on that, but Philip's way of showing it was through pushing, through high standards, through the kind of rough love that a boy raised in wartime conditions understood far better than a child of peacetime. Charles and Philip had different natures from the very beginning. Philip once described himself as a pragmatist and his son as a romantic. They saw the world through completely different lenses. There were years when the distance between them grew so wide that father and son reportedly communicated only through their staffs. There were disagreements over Charles's love life, over his interests, over the direction of his public role. But something else was also true. Beneath the tension, beneath the silence and the stiff upper lips and the years of misunderstanding, there was love. It took a long time for both men to find a way to reach each other. It took Camilla. This is a fact that many people do not fully appreciate. It was Camilla who helped repair something between Charles and his father. Those who knew the family well said that she had a gift for getting on with people, for finding common ground, for softening rooms that had grown cold. Philip, who had initially been resistant to Camilla's place in his son's life, gradually came around. He saw what she did for Charles, how she steadied him, how she made him laugh, how she gave him something to come home to after decades of loneliness and public pressure. And in his own way, Philip acknowledged her. When Philip died in April 2021, at the age of 99, Charles was devastated. He gave a public tribute that broke through the usual composure of royal statements. He called Philip his dear papa. He said that he missed his father enormously. He said that Philip would have been amazed by the outpouring of love from around the world. Those who watched it saw something in Charles that he rarely allowed the public to see, a son grieving, simply and honestly, for the man who had shaped him in ways both hard and beautiful. The last conversation Charles had with Philip, revealed in a BBC documentary filmed shortly after Philip's death, was about Philip's upcoming 100th birthday. Charles had to speak loudly because Philip's hearing had faded. They talked about the celebration being planned. It was an ordinary conversation between a father and a son. And then Philip was gone. In the years that followed, Charles carried that grief the way he carried everything, inwardly, quietly, with a kind of contained sorrow that rarely broke the surface in public. He became king. The weight of the crown was placed on his head, and with it came all the responsibilities, all the complexity, all the pressure that the role demanded. He was dealing with his own health. He was dealing with the fractures in his family. He was managing a monarchy in a world that was changing faster than any institution could comfortably keep pace with. And through all of it, standing beside him was Camilla. Camilla had said publicly that Philip was a role model to her. In an interview with an Australian publication in 2022, she described him as someone who always told her exactly what he thought, who was a very good ear who gave her advice she could trust. She spoke about watching the way he supported Queen Elizabeth, not in a showy way, not loudly or dramatically, but quietly, steadily, simply by being there. She said it was something she had learned from watching him. She was, in her own words, following his example. The idea of being a consort, of supporting a sovereign without overshadowing them, of finding the space to be useful and present and loyal. She had modeled it, at least in part, on what she had observed in Philip. And then, quietly, without drawing attention to it, without making a speech or releasing a statement or calling a press conference, she began wearing a ring. The ring was not flashy. That was what made it so easy to miss. Camilla, as queen, had access to some of the most spectacular pieces of jewelry in the royal collection, tiaras that had sat on the heads of queens for centuries, diamond brooches with histories reaching back to the courts of Europe, sapphire suites and emerald necklaces and pearl strands of extraordinary rarity. Against all of that, a small gold band on the little finger of her left hand barely registered. But it was there, and it had been there since early 2025. Royal watchers who pay attention to the smallest details began to notice it appearing regularly at Royal Ascot, at Wimbledon, at formal engagements and quieter ones. A petite gold band made up of 7 small rounded sections, each one engraved with an ancient symbol: a lyre, a ship, an amphora. 7 sections, 7 symbols, each one whispering something from a very old world. The ring came from the Royal Collection Trust. That much was eventually confirmed, but its full history remained, as one publication put it, slightly murky. The symbols were Greek in nature, and the Greek connection, once followed, led somewhere specific. The 7 sections appeared to reference the 7 Ionian Islands, a chain of islands off the western coast of Greece. One of those islands, the capital of the old Ionian Republic before 1815, was Corfu. Corfu was where Prince Philip was born. Philip had been born in Corfu in 1921, the son of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark. His family had been forced into exile from Greece when he was still an infant, following the forced abdication of his uncle. He left Corfu as a baby, carried out of his homeland as political upheaval swept the country, and never truly returned. He grew up stateless, reinventing himself, finding a home in the British Royal Navy, and then in the life he built beside Queen Elizabeth. But Corfu, that island where his story began, was always part of who he was, part of the history that shaped him before he was old enough to know it was shaping him. Camilla was wearing a ring engraved with the symbols of Philip's birthplace. She had chosen a piece from the royal collection that carried, quietly carved into its gold surface, a tribute to the man who had been her father-in-law, her role model, the man whose example she had chosen to follow in one of the hardest jobs in the world. And she had not announced it. She had not explained it. She had simply put it on her finger and worn it to Ascot and Wimbledon and every event in between, letting it speak for itself to anyone patient enough to look. It was Kate who put it together first. The Princess of Wales has always been known for her attention to detail. It is one of the qualities that royal observers mention most often when describing her: the care she takes, the thoughtfulness she brings to choices that might seem small from the outside. She notices what other people overlook. She reads the room in ways that are quiet and precise, and in the way that people who pay attention to the history of the family she married into sometimes do, she began to trace the symbols on Camilla's ring. When Kate understood what the ring meant, when the symbols pointed to the Ionian Islands, and the Ionian Islands pointed to Corfu, and Corfu pointed to the beginning of Philip's story, she did not keep it to herself. She brought it to Charles. What happened in that moment has not been captured by cameras or published in official statements. The details come from those close to the family, from the kind of quiet reporting that surrounds the royal household without ever fully entering it. But what those accounts describe is not what anyone might have expected from a king managing a reign, a health challenge, and a fractured family all at once. What they describe is a man who was stopped completely still. Charles had known, of course, that Camilla admired his father. He had seen the way she spoke about Philip, had read her words about role models and quiet support and doing things without fuss. But the ring, the deliberateness of it, the specificity of it, the way she had chosen a piece from the collection that connected directly to Philip's roots and worn it without ever drawing attention to it, that was something else entirely. It was not a public tribute. It was a private one. It was Camilla in her own language, honoring the man whose example she was trying to live up to, carrying him with her to every public engagement, every ceremony, every moment where the weight of the role pressed down. For Charles, who had grown up in the shadow of that complicated relationship with his father, who had cried as a boy and grieved as a king, and spent decades searching for the words to bridge a gap that sometimes felt unbridgeable, this was not a small thing. It touched something in him that the surface of official royal life rarely reaches. His father, whom he had loved imperfectly and lost completely, had been remembered in the most quiet and personal way possible by the woman who stood beside him every day. Those who were present when Kate shared what she had discovered say that Charles was visibly moved. His composure, which he guards with the discipline of someone who has spent his entire life being watched, slipped in the way it only slips when something reaches past the armor of duty and obligation and finds the person underneath. He was not performing grief or gratitude. He was simply feeling it, in the way that only truly unexpected kindness can produce. Camilla, when Charles came to her, did not make much of it. That is very much in keeping with who she is, the person who, as she herself described, does things quietly, follows along without fanfare, supports without making the support the story. She had not worn the ring to be noticed. She had worn it because she meant it, and that, perhaps, was what undid Charles most completely. It was not a gesture designed for the cameras or for history or for public approval. It was something she had done entirely for herself, and for Philip, and in doing so, had given her husband something he had not known he needed until it was placed in front of him. The broader context of the royal family in 2025 and into 2026 was not a simple one. Reports of tension between Camilla and Kate had circulated through the press for months, friction over standards, over roles, over the shifting dynamics of a monarchy in transition. Insiders described their relationship at various points as icy, as complicated, as caught in a clash between two women who each held significant influence over the direction of the family and were not always moving in the same direction. There were reports of a difficult moment during a state visit, of disagreements over how to handle family matters, of a broader friction that palace aides struggled to contain. The public narrative was one of rivalry, of two powerful women in a household where there was not always room for both of them. But what the ring story revealed was something different. It revealed that underneath the friction, underneath the public narratives and the tabloid tension, there were also private moments of genuine connection. Kate noticing the ring, Kate taking the time to trace its meaning, Kate choosing to bring that meaning to Charles, not because it served any political purpose within the family, but because she understood what it would mean to him. And Camilla wearing it in the first place, carrying Philip with her in a language too quiet for the cameras to catch. The monarchy has always communicated in symbols. That is part of what makes it so ancient and so difficult to fully understand from the outside. A tiara is not just a tiara. A brooch is not just a brooch. The way someone stands, the ring they choose to wear, the gesture they make with one hand during a ceremony, all of it carries meaning, layer upon layer, reaching back through generations of history and forward into futures that have not yet been written. Camilla understood this. She had always understood it, even before she became queen, even during the years when the public was not always ready to accept her as part of the family story. She had watched and learned and found her own way of expressing loyalty in a form that the institution had always respected most, through quiet, consistent, unannounced devotion. And Charles, who had navigated the public stage with enormous difficulty for most of his life, who had been so often misunderstood and so rarely given the benefit of the doubt, Charles saw in that small gold ring everything that his complicated, lifelong relationship with his father had been building toward. He saw that Philip had not disappeared when he died. Philip was still there, still being honored, still guiding the people who loved Charles, still somehow present in the family even as it changed and fractured and slowly, unevenly, found its way forward. The ring itself sat quiet on Camilla's finger the same way it always had. 7 small rindels, an amphora, a lyre, a ship. The symbols of an island where a boy was born, forced into exile before he could walk, who grew up to become one of the most remarkable and difficult and beloved figures in the history of the British monarchy. The symbols of a place Philip never fully returned to, but never fully left either. The symbols that Camilla had chosen to wear on her hand as she walked alongside her husband through one of the most demanding chapters of both their lives. Some secrets are not really secrets. They are just quiet truths waiting for someone to look closely enough to find them. Kate looked closely. Charles listened. And in a family that so rarely allows itself to feel things in front of anyone else, something shifted, briefly, privately, completely, in the way that only the truth, offered gently and without agenda, can shift things. The ring is still there, small, gold, unannounced, carrying its symbols, carrying its meaning, carrying on the finger of a queen who learned her role by watching a man she never stopped honoring the whole complicated weight of a family's love.